So, my name is Sally Horner and I'm a solution-focused hypnotherapist and psychotherapist. And today I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the creative brain. And if I were to ask you, what would you think of if I asked you to imagine a creative person? It's possible that you may imagine an artist, maybe an artist sitting in a little attic in Paris, painting away on his easel. Or maybe you might imagine a musician, maybe someone like Mozart with mad hair, tinkering away on his piano. And if I were to ask you if you were artistic, I know I've asked a lot of people and they often say, well, I don't have an artistic bone in my body. Even people who I know who are artists will say that. But the amazing thing is that actually we're all born incredibly creative. And no one is born more creative than anyone else. It's certainly not exclusive. We are born as young children with wild imaginations. We are born curious. Preschoolers, they're always asking why. They want to know. They want to understand their world. They want to know how things work, how things go together. And they have this desire to try things out in ways that we lose when we get older. And so no one is born without that creative spark at all. We are all equally creative. And by the time we get to secondary school, we don't think in that way as much. And that's partly because we're taught really not to. So the primary school child will grab a box, a young child, and they might draw a face on it and then they'll pretend it's a robot. Or they might sit in a box and they'll take a broom and pretend that the broom is a paddle and then their box becomes a boat. So primary school children look at things as everything is possible. They put things together that wouldn't necessarily go together and they include everything in their thinking. But when we become older and we go through secondary school, we're taught to be a lot more logical, to be analytical, and then we start to rule things out. So we exclude possibilities rather than including them. And while that is great for certain types of thinking, it rather stifles our creativity, something that we inherently do. And it's a shame really that, we can't be taught to use both ways of thinking because both are equally valid. Creativity is what our brains naturally do. We just don't pay attention to it, we don't notice it, so therefore we don't develop it. But there were a few that did. And interestingly, the people I know of that developed their creativity didn't have a formal education. So Edison, who invented the light bulb, it took him 5,000 attempts before he got a filament that actually worked. And he said that he thought that was great because he discovered 5,000 new things that didn't work. Whereas someone else might say, well, you might as well give up. Leonardo was able to put things together. He came up with the idea that sound carried in waves while he was watching a stone drop into a pool and watching the ripples flow outwards. And so it's this ability to think slightly differently that allows us to develop our creativity. So how does it work? Well, first of all, I need to explain the brain. So animals do not have an intellectual mind. They don't have a cortex, which is the wrinkly bit that you see on the telly. Now, animals just, when they're faced with a situation, well, they'll come up with an automatic response. But as humans, we have a prefrontal cortex, and that's where the magic happens, because inside our prefrontal cortex, when we're faced with situations or new ideas, we can ask ourselves, what if? And we can start to predict what might happen based on the experiences that we've already had. And then we can add new ideas to what we already know and develop something completely new. And that really is the basis of creativity. So it's not just about artists or musicians. Creativity is a lot more universal, actually, than we tend to think it is. So there is a myth that when people are being creative, that they're manufacturing something from absolute scratch. But it's not from scratch at all. We absorb the world around us and our experiences, and we use them as building blocks. So every memory, every thought, every emotion is used as a building block to create with. You may have heard of David Eagleman. He's a neuroscientist in America. I think he's a professor. And he talks about creativity. He made a little film on Netflix all about the creative mind. And he talks about 3 ways of being creative. There are 3 Bs. So blending, breaking, and bending. And so just to explain what they are. So blending, it's when you take 2 separate ideas and you put them together. So for example, taking paper and glue and then making an envelope. So paper was a separate idea, glue was a separate idea, then somewhere along the line someone invented the envelope. Breaking. So that's where you take an idea and you pull it apart and then you reassemble it in a slightly different way. And then bending is where you modify an idea. And so for that you can imagine chocolate buttons, one of my favourites, Cadbury's chocolate buttons, absolutely love them. Well, it wasn't enough just to have ordinary chocolate buttons, but somewhere along the line someone invented giant chocolate buttons. Yay! So actually the idea was actually bended in order to create something which was the same but different. So why be creative? Well, there are so many reasons to be creative, but the fundamental reason to do it is because it actually makes us happy. It's interesting to think, isn't it, that our brain will actually go down the same default neural pathway. 80%, I think it's as much as 80% of what we do is habit. Well, we're not really thinking consciously at all. Our brain just does what it does because it knows how to do it, because there's a pathway that the electricity flows down, and it's the path of least resistance. And while that's a great form of energy saving, it's actually really awful in terms of our imagination, and it's really, really, really boring. So when we're creative, we can step outside of that path of least resistance and take risks. And we have to be prepared to go through that slight discomfort for the ultimate gain of adding something to our lives. And how do we do it? Well, it's all about the theta brainwaves. Theta brainwaves. Now, if you're a regular on My Calm Mind, you'll know that there are lots of guided relaxations. And the whole point about guided relaxations are to get your brain into a nice, relaxed, calm state. And the chances are, if you're in that calm, relaxed state, it's that you're going to be in theta brainwaves. And there are other times when you're in theta brainwaves. So I already talked about when you're doing something habitual, like driving a car on a motorway, and you find that you're on autopilot and your mind starts to wander. But also theta is, you get theta when you wake up first thing in the morning and you're not quite awake, but you're not quite asleep. And you get it when you're about to drift off at night, but you also get it when you're in that dream state, REM, rapid eye movement. And theta feels wonderfully calm and it feels wonderfully peaceful. And something interesting happens. Our conscious mind just drifts off somewhere else. It just goes, it vanishes. And then that leaves us connected to our subconscious mind. And that can be really helpful because our subconscious mind governs our imagination. It governs our emotions, it governs our memory, and it governs our intuition and our habits. And when we're in a theta brainwave state and our conscious mind is off somewhere else, something really interesting happens. We can absorb information without any resistance. without any sort of critical thoughts interfering. And so we absorb thoughts differently. There is no censorship or no guilt to the thoughts that we think when we're in a theta brainwave. So it's a bit like going back to that childlike state of openness when we discover things without that criticism getting in the way. And so if we were to listen to positive messages as you do on any guided relaxation, then those messages can be absorbed in a much more direct way, and you can use those messages to start to make changes. And if we were to rehearse how we want our lives to be, then interesting things happen, because that inner mental rehearsal tells our brain how we want things to be, but also our subconscious doesn't understand that that inner mental rehearsal, that imagination, isn't real. And so what it does is it lays it down as memory. So you can even create artificial memories of your own success by practicing in a theta brainwave exactly how you want your life to be. So what we can actually do is to change some of those negative behaviour patterns that we all have by bypassing those mental blocks to enable kind of new levels of thought. And we can use theta to change what we don't like. Well, we all have negative thoughts about ourselves. We're all probably very, very aware of the inner critic and the messages that tells us about ourselves. And those messages are beliefs that we've developed along our life journey, and they can be very, very powerful. And the trouble with those messages are that they can often become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the sorts of messages that we have are I'm not worthy or I'm not good enough. So again, if you want to try and bypass those self-limiting ideas about yourself, and you listen to positive suggestion in a theta brain state, you can change those beliefs. And then the funny thing is you start to notice and perceive things differently. So you become aware of opportunities in places where you wouldn't have noticed them before. You start to think differently, and then the world interacts differently with you. And this is how you can use your creativity for your own benefit. And the interesting thing is you'll know when it's working, because these thoughts are different. They come like flashes of inspiration, as if from out of nowhere. So if I were to say to you, have you ever tried to remember someone's name, and you thought and you thought and you thought consciously, but you cannot remember it. And then often you'll go off and do something, easy, like, I don't know, driving a car or something that you do automatically. And then the thought comes as if from out of nowhere, and you remember the name that you couldn't remember. Well, that's because our subconscious never stops working. And so when people come to therapy, we often explore ideas about what people want to change, and we consider what it might look like. And we have lots of ideas about this change. And then what happens is that we do a little bit of trance, so we get the brain into that theta brainwave, and I put lots of positive suggestion to help the client embed ideas into their subconscious. And then the subconscious will incubate these ideas, and while it's incubating, it will combine this idea with other ideas, and it will combine it with other information and recombine in lots of different ways, adding in your unique experiences until the right combination is found. And as if by magic, a new idea just bubbles to the surface of the conscious mind. You don't just need to listen. You don't have to just listen to guided relaxations. It's just thinking positive thoughts when you're in a theta brainwave, or just mentally imaging how you want your life to be. But then knowing that the subconscious will take it on board, that you don't have to give it any more conscious thought, and that those new and interesting ideas about yourself and how you want to be, they will emerge. And that really is the way to use creativity in a way that's beneficial for you. And the interesting thing, just another nugget of information, is that when we're in a theta brain state, we can retain 300% more information than at any other time. And Einstein says that creativity is intelligence having fun. So if you found this video helpful, please do subscribe to my channel and like this video. Bye for now.